they should be looking to, not releasing rapists early, which is severely traumatising the victims or the survivors who are concerned that their attackers are going to be out on the streets.
Would you accept your government's responsibility in causing that trauma by not building enough prison places, something about which we've talked about before?
We have. Well, I mean, the last government built 14,000 new places. Obviously, some closed down because they were Victorian and came to the end of their lives. And in fact, the total prison estate has actually gone.
What is up, everybody? Harry here. This is Lewis Goodall interviewing Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, on prison capacity, social care funding, and the Conservative record on both. Philp argues Labour ignored Tory warnings about early release and that Britain's tax burden is already too high to fund anything else. Goodall pushes back with the actual numbers on prison building under the last government. This is a genuine, contested economic and policy debate. Tax burden, prison capacity, social care funding. So I'll try to lay out both sides' actual arguments rather than just picking a winner. Get subscribed if that's useful to you. Let's get into it.
What these plans actually entail.
He says he wants to, quote, grasp the nettle of social care. He says, it's obviously something he's talked about for a long time. He thinks governments of every colour have put it off, including the government that the Prime Minister he's just replaced. The Lib Dems have pledged their support to working cross-party on that. Will the Conservatives work with him on that?
Well, look, we are obviously prepared to work constructively on the big issues facing our country, like welfare reform. We offered to support the government if they'd do the right thing on welfare reform, which they unfortunately didn't do. They did a chicken U-turn. On welfare, yes, we are prepared to work constructively, but we don't think the solution is going to be huge tax increases imposed on the British public and British business.
Service? Do you think the idea of a national care service, bringing it into the NHS, would be a good idea? A costly one, but a good idea.
So we have no idea what the details are, so it's impossible to comment.
But just in principle.
But I would repeat the point. You said costly. I would repeat the point that if Andy Burnham has in mind massive tax increases, whether it's on businesses or individuals, to fund his plans, that will not be acceptable. He should be looking for savings, for example, in the welfare budget to fund whether it's defence spending.
Introduced the National Care Levy. I mean, that was literally an increase in national insurance in order to pay for social care. So there's precedent there, isn't there?
There is, but I think our tax burden has gone too far now, right? We're now several years into the future. This Labour government in the last 2 years has already put through the biggest tax rises in a generation.
But you would
Let
agree.
me finish the point. Hang on, let me finish the point.
Sure, okay.
Even though they promised they wouldn't increase tax, they put through the biggest tax rises in a generation. Businesses are now going bust as a result of that. One in my constituency, Coughlan's Bakery, 170 staff, been going for 89 years, went bankrupt because of Labour's tax increases. People are leaving the country, successful people going to places like Dubai and Milan and goodness knows where else, driven away by Labour's taxes. So the idea that we should put taxes up even further to fund anything, frankly, is really damaging.
But you would agree
we need to be finding spending cuts, particularly in the welfare budget,
but you would agree
to fund
that the social care
priorities.
system right now is a car crash, and there are people listening to this right now, watching this right now, who are suffering, their families suffering as a result of successive governments, including the ones in which you served, ducking this issue for political purposes. So it would be at least a good thing, even if you don't agree with the Burnham solution, that Burnham will try and do something about it.
Listen, I mean, we'll engage constructively, for sure, and it does need fixing, you're right. Although don't forget, we heard Keir Starmer say exactly this 2 years ago, there'll be a cross-party working
Boris
group.
Johnson stood outside on the steps of Downing Street and saying that he had a plan for social care, wouldn't tell us what it was, and didn't implement it when he actually became Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, look...
That wasn't great, was it? It wasn't ideal.
We'll work, as I say, and Keir Starmer did the same thing and didn't deliver anything. So we'll engage constructively, but we are not going to support tax increases because this country is overtaxed already, and it's actually causing our economy damage.
Even if there was a solution to social care, no tax increase, you wouldn't support it whatsoever. Even if there was actually a solution to alleviate all that pain that we've just described.
Because we're overtaxed already. It's actually causing damage. Like I say, a business in my constituency has just gone bankrupt.
But social care, the lack of solution to social care is causing damage. Look at the fact that how many beds within the NHS right now are being taken up and consumed by the fact that there is nowhere to send people who we ought to be able to send social care to.
So sure,
there's damage in every direction.
Sure, delayed discharge is for sure a problem. I see it in my own borough, Croydon, the whole time. But if there's more money that needs to be spent, the way to find that is not by increasing taxes. It will cause even more businesses to go bust, even more successful people to leave the country. We need to find savings in the already record amount of government spending, particularly on welfare. And by the way, there was an interesting stat came out, I think it was yesterday, that the Scottish government tried increasing taxes on the highest earners. They increased the top rate to 48%, so 3% higher than in England. People then left Scotland, and the Scottish government raised less money as a result. Increasing taxes too much, and they have already been increased too much, actually leads to less money being raised. So that, honestly, that is not the solution.
On other matters, the government has paused the early release schemes, something the Conservatives had advocated. Where would you suggest the government finds the extra places that it will need if that cessation is to endure?
Yeah, well, first of all, they should have, the Labour government should have listened to our warnings months ago. We voted against these measures in Parliament because letting out rapists early, letting out people who were perpetrators of the grooming gang scandal, letting them out early is terrible for victims and survivors. Terrible. And we warned about this repeatedly. We voted against it. The Labour government ignored us. And now those chickens are coming home to roost. This scheme is set in law, and it's due to start on the 2nd of September, just a few weeks' time, and Parliament is not sitting between now and then. So I don't know quite how they're planning to fix this. I'd like to see what their proposals are. I'd like to see what their prison place forecasts are. Apparently, at the moment, there are something like 3,000 prison spaces that are not occupied. But one thing I'm clear about, the government should not, under any circumstances, be letting out rapists early.
But where should we put the extra prisoners that will then be taking up the spaces that they would have taken up if those people had been released? Because we're going to have to put them somewhere, aren't we? And as you know, the prison estate is not in a particularly good place,
Yeah, well,
at least because of a lack of building over the years when you were in office.
Well, there are currently, I understand, about 3,000 free spaces.
Yeah, but as you know, that sounds good, but in reality, of course, you're going to have difficulties because capacity is constrained by security category. You can't put a category D prisoner in a prison or vice versa. Male versus female prisons, remand versus sentenced prisoners. It goes on, right? Actually, those places not easily transferable.
Well, I think I think to some extent they are. There are some constraints, but there are.
Well, you can't put a male.
No, sure, I
prisoner
understand.
in a female
Obviously, I understand the point. I understand the point.
Yeah.
But there are 3,000 spare places. That is just a fact. They should
it's not
be
very useful.
They should be looking at rapidly deployable cells, which I've seen used. I mean, years ago in government, I saw these. I think it was at HMP Huntercombe in Oxfordshire, where within the secure perimeter they drop in rapidly deployable prefabricated cells, which can be used to create capacity quite quickly. Those are the kind of solutions they should be looking to, not releasing rapists early, which is severely traumatizing the victims or the survivors who are concerned that their attackers are going to be out on the streets.
Would you accept
of their own towns.
your government's responsibility in causing that trauma by not building enough prison places, something about which we've talked about before?
We have. Well, I mean, the last government built 14,000 new places. Obviously, some closed down because they were Victorian and came to the end of their lives. And in fact, the total prison estate has actually gone down in the 2 years since the election. And to be honest, the Labour government have been in charge now for 2 years, so I think it's about time they took responsibility for the decisions that they've made.
Can you?
You can put up rapidly deployable cells in 2 years. The clue's in the title, rapidly deployable.
Why didn't you build more of them yourself then? Because the net extra prison places we saw under your government, as we've discussed before, was about 35 a year. So maybe that phrase about like stones and glass houses come to mind,
which equated to we built 14,000 total new places,
and
we never. The fact is, the last Conservative government did not let out rapists early.
No, you were storing up a problem for Labour to deal with.
The last government.
Watch the exact numbers Philp and Goodall use on prison capacity, because this is one of those rare cases where the underlying facts are official government data, not a matter of interpretation. Philp cites 14,000 new places built under the last Conservative government, which is accurate as a gross figure. But Ministry of Justice transparency data confirms the net increase over that same 2010 to 2002-04 period was only around 482 to 500 places, because roughly 12,500 to 13,600 places were closed over the same span, mostly dilapidated Victorian cells. Goodall's about 35 places a year figure lines up almost exactly with that official net number divided across 14 years. Citing the gross figure without the net one is technically accurate and genuinely misleading at the same time, and is worth knowing that distinction shows up repeatedly in how this specific statistic gets used across British politics. Not just in this one interview, the rapidly deployable cells point deserves to be taken on its own merits, separate from the numbers dispute. Philp's suggestion, prefabricated cells within existing secure perimeters, is a real method that has been used. And it's a reasonable idea to raise as a faster alternative to full prison construction. The tension Goodall raises isn't with the idea itself. It's the obvious follow-up. If that option existed and was genuinely faster and cheaper, the same question applies to the previous government's 14 years in office as it does to Labour's too. And Philp doesn't have a clear answer for why it wasn't used at scale when his own party held office. The tax in Scotland comparison is worth engaging with fairly rather than dismissing outright, because Philp's underlying economic claim that raising top marginal rates can sometimes reduce total revenue collected due to behavioral responses and relocation is a real phenomenon economists study, not something invented for this interview. Scotland's income tax divergence from the rest of the UK and reports of higher earners relocating in response has been a genuine and ongoing debate in Scottish fiscal policy, though the scale of that effect and whether it fully explains any revenue shortfall remains disputed among economists rather than settled. Whether that principle applies at the scale and rates being discussed for social care funding specifically is a separate, harder question. This exchange doesn't resolve either way. Where Philp's position runs into real difficulty is less about the specific policy arguments and more about consistency. He criticizes the current government for not fixing a prison capacity problem within 2 years while citing his own. Government's 14-year record as a defense against further scrutiny, and criticizes tax rises to fund social care, while his own government introduced a comparable levy for the same purpose when in office. Those aren't unanswerable positions, but Philp doesn't actually reconcile them in the interview. And that gap, not the underlying policy questions themselves, is what makes this exchange planned the way it does. It's worth being precise, too, about the claim that no one was released early under the last government's watch. Sentencing and release policy did shift meaningfully across those 14 years, including changes to remand capacity and temporary release schemes used to manage overcrowding at various points. So the clean before and after contrast Philp draws is simpler than the actual record. Even if the specific early release scheme under discussion here is genuinely a Labour government policy decision rather than a continuation of prior practice, if breakdowns like this are useful to you, get subscribed to Harry Unfiltered, and I'll keep checking the numbers properly, one interview at a time.